Hello, everybody. My name is Russell Katz. I'm the Investor Relations Advisor with the Capital Network for AdAlta. Today's webinar is an especially exciting one. There has been quite an interesting memorandum of understanding released to the market. And with us today, we have Tim, Managing Director and CEO of AdAlta, and Andrew, who is with Synthesis BioVentures. So we're very excited to have both of them with us here today. Please, if you have any questions, post them in the Q&A section below. After the presentation, we will be taking questions and I will be reading them out. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Tim.
Thank you, Russell, and welcome everybody. This is a very exciting day for us at AdAlta with a significant announcement of our collaboration with Synthesis BioVentures. This is a significant advancement of one of our core strategies, and we're working together with Synthesis over the next 6 to 12 months to create what we hope will be a company called AdCella, which will focus on connecting Asian innovation in cellular immunotherapies with Australia's manufacturing and clinical execution ecosystem and AdAlta's iBody technology to deliver these amazing innovations to Western regulated markets and patients in those markets. I'm particularly delighted to join forces with Synthesis because of the expertise they bring to us. Most of you on the channel today will be familiar with AdAlta, but I'd like to pass over to Professor Andrew Wilks, the founder of Synthesis BioVentures, to introduce Synthesis and their organization. Andrew.
Thanks, Tim. So I'm Andrew Wilks, ex-scientist now in the VC area. We in the company, and I'm one of the managing directors. I think there's at least one other one on the call, Fabio Turati. We are an extension of a broader group of companies, the Synthesis Group, which has been building and translating research for clinical development over the last dozen or so years. We have both sort of China experience. We built businesses in China. We have a great familiarity with the challenges and the opportunities that are presented there. So that cross-border transaction capability is very much part of our repertoire. But we're also a pretty traditional venture capital organization that invests into excellent scientific opportunities, helping translate those opportunities and turning them into new pipeline. So from our point of view, we come with a bunch of skills around China, that cross-border capability, but also capital and sort of help asset development skills. And so really excited to join forces with AdAlta. You can see on the left-hand side of that slide that the range of skills and capabilities they bring. The Venn diagram is perfectly placed from our point of view to help build AdCella. So very excited about that prospect.
Thank you, Andrew, and we'll dive more into the synergies between the two organizations later on in the discussion today. So let's put this in context. This memorandum of understanding advances one of AdAlta's key growth strategies. Those key growth strategies are outlined on this slide. We've been talking about these three strategies for about a year now, and certainly since the AGM last year. Our lead priority at the moment is realizing the value of AD214, our lead asset. That's in active partnering discussions. They are advancing well for either an out-licensing or a co-development or asset financing of that product. The second strategy is the progress we're making on our ICAR and IPET programs as our internal existing discovery programs. But the third strategy we've been talking about is how do we move beyond the existing portfolio? How do we invest in our iBody platform and pipeline? And our aspiration here has been to secure clinic-ready assets that complement the iBody platform that enable us to build out a robust clinical stage pipeline behind AD214 that provides us with the basis for future growth. And today we are discussing the MOU with Synthesis BioVentures that really, for the first time, allows us to talk about how we're focusing that investment in the iBody platform, focusing it on cellular immunotherapy, where we think the iBodies have specific advantages. And the MOU that we have announced is going to enable us to progress that faster and in a more capital efficient way than we would have been able to if we simply waited for the realization of the value of AD214. So let's talk about the opportunity in cellular immunotherapies. These therapies are a brand new modality that's transforming cancer outcomes. They involve re-engineering a patient's own immune cells to enable them to see cancer. We are producing a living drug where a single dose is potentially curative. Today, there are 6 FDA-approved versions of a subset of cellular immunotherapies called CAR T-cell therapies, and they are generating complete response rates of 50 to over 80% in cancers, largely blood cancers, where there are no better outcomes for patients and where in most cases they've failed multiple lines of chemotherapy. This is creating enormous hope for cancer patients that don't have good enough outcomes despite the advances in immunotherapies in recent times. These CAR T products generated 2.6 billion in sales in 2022. That market is forecast to reach in excess of 20 billion by 2028, and 50% of that revenue is expected to come from solid tumours by 2030. Now, solid tumours represent 90% of all cancers, but they're much harder to target, harder to access, and much more immune suppressive than blood cancers. And in order to translate these amazing cellular immunotherapies into solid cancers, we're going to need new multifunctional cell therapies. And this is where we believe that iBodies are particularly advantaged. And we're just starting to see the fruits of that success as the first cellular immunotherapies, not CAR T cells, but cellular immunotherapies for solid tumours were approved by the FDA earlier this year. Importantly, from a commercial point of view, which our shareholders on the call today would be most interested in, one of the attractivenesses of this particular application of iBodies is the value attributed to assets in this class. On average, upfront deal values for cell and gene therapies are 3.5 times higher than they are for any other biologic drugs. And this has been sustained over a number of years. And importantly, these assets transact early. Preclinical or early clinical data is sufficient to get significant interest from larger pharmaceutical companies. And of course, in cancer and particularly in autoimmune diseases where these products are applied, you can get clinical proof of concept at a very early stage. So commercially, the field is very interesting. The question we asked ourselves was, what's the best way for AdAlta to play in this space? The result of that investigation and that exploration, which has encompassed review of assets around the world, multiple different modalities, discussions with people who are investing in this class, is what we're now calling our East to West cellular immunotherapy strategy. And it's built upon 3 key insights that underpin AdAlta and ultimately AdCella's vision. The first of these is that AdAlta's iBody technology is really ideally suited to creating these multifunctional cellular immunotherapy products. It's the smallest possible building block that could be used to create the necessary targeting and immune protection that's required. And at AdAlta, we obviously have operating capability in running clinical trials as a result of our work with AD214, and we have access to capital in the Australian ecosystem, bolstered by the collaboration with Synthesis BioVentures. The second insight is that Asia has become the global epicenter of innovation in cellular immunotherapy. And importantly, it has a really supportive regulatory system, particularly in China, that enables early clinical data from investigator-led trials to de-risk assets. And the final insight is that Australia actually has some significant advantages in this field. We have a well-developed, globally recognised manufacturing and clinical delivery ecosystem that's well experienced in cellular immunotherapies, recognised by Western regulatory agencies, and is cost advantage relative to US clinical trials, even before you apply the R&D tax incentive. So I'll now turn to each of these advantages in turn. Let's talk about the Eastern Hemisphere as the epicenter of cellular immunotherapy innovation. The chart on the left shows the number of cellular immunotherapy developers, companies, if you like, as at 2023 by geographic region. And you can see that there are more in Asia Pacific than anywhere else in the world, including North America. And the chart on the right shows the number of cellular immunotherapy clinical trials currently running in those different regions. And you can see that 61% of all clinical trials are running in Asia Pacific, the vast majority of those that are in China, in part due to the efficiency of that investigator-initiated trials framework that I mentioned earlier. The number of newly identified CAR T-cell products, for example, originating from Chinese companies is doubling every year since 2014. So this trend is not now, it's going to continue as well. We then talk about Australia's ecosystem. We have a well-established cell therapy delivery ecosystem built on deep experience in clinical trials, well-established manufacturing and supply chain capability, and established innovation and translation in this space. There have been over 138 cell and gene therapy clinical trials run to date, including the first ever delivery of a CAR T product in a commercial clinical trial outside of North America. We have 25 sites already approved for commercial delivery of CAR T-cell therapies, and our clinical trial costs are 25 to 50% cheaper than the US in this field. We have a well-established manufacturing and supply chain. Cell Therapies Proprietary Limited at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, for example, is already approved for commercial CAR T supply to the TGA, the US FDA, the Japanese PMDA, and the European Medicines Agency. So we have the standards to supply product into all of these regions from Australia. And finally, we have more than 20 companies at last count developing advanced therapeutics, cell and gene therapies, with AusBiotech's Cell and Gene Catalyst already set up to help drive that ecosystem forward. And finally, AdAlta's iBodies enable superior CAR constructs and other combinations of functions in advanced therapies when we combine them with the cell therapy platforms of our partners. The iBody is the smallest possible building block that can be used to add function to a cellular immunotherapy. This means it requires less room in the inserted genetic material, and that is important because you need a new, there's only a finite amount of genetic material you can use to insert into a cell to modify it, and so each building block needs to be as small as possible to cram as much function in as possible. The iBody can therefore provide improved targeting, increased persistence and performance of the cell, and higher payload or functionality. We've already started to demonstrate this through our collaboration with Carina Biotech, where we have 3 targets in early stages of discovery, and we're getting significant interest from other industry partners, including some of those that we are earmarking for the initial AdCella pipeline. So when you combine all of that together, we are creating a very unique value proposition for AdCella, combining the innovation and geographic proximity of Asian cell and gene therapy developments, the world-class ecosystem here in Australia, AdAlta's iBody capability, and now the expertise of Synthesis. And at this point, I'll ask Andrew to come back on the line and talk about how this strategy actually intersects with the thinking that Synthesis has been doing and why they were attracted to this model.
So thanks, Tim. We've already had this model very much in our sights in the small molecule space. We've had a strong history in small molecule development. We have worked in China and built small molecule businesses there. And this cross-border piece where high quality assets in China combined with all of the things that Tim showed in the previous slides about the quality of what we can do to add value to these assets is already in our sights. So the sort of local and regional capabilities that AdCella would bring in terms of the cell therapy opportunity is again a perfect replication of our own point of view on the small molecule side. So when we connected with a view to taking this project on, it was exactly in our repertoire of interesting propositions that we were already in the small molecule space. We love the idea of that depth of research and opportunities that China in particular has put together in this space. We love the idea of the Australian proposition with all the skills and capabilities and the support mechanisms that we have to deliver things. And we love the idea on top of that of the AdAlta iBody technology bringing additional and enhanced new IP to the proposition. So this is really, I think, one of the most exciting collaborations and propositions that we have in front of us as a group. And you'd have to say right now, China's struggling a little bit in terms of how it will push its own agenda. There are geopolitical things going on, of course, so they very much need to embrace overseas global opportunities, and so there is a push for those guys to do this. I think this is in part from our point of view being right place, right time in terms of finding a partner like AdAlta to work with here, and then the sort of commercial push that's clearly evolving now around how these brand new technologies need to be externalized and globalized. And so, right place, right time. This is, from our point of view, a really exciting proposition.
Thank you, Andrew. And I think you can see now why we were attracted to work with Synthesis on this opportunity. Clearly, we'd identified all the pieces. The alignment of thinking around the China opportunity, coupled with Synthesis's deep expertise in the Chinese market, simply complemented very strongly and filled a capability gap that would have taken us a lot longer to build on our own, notwithstanding that several of us have worked in and around China. But with Synthesis, we've just turbocharged that access and understanding of the market. And so we're super excited about adding them into the mix, and it really does give extra impetus to the AdCella competitive advantage. So let's move to the collaboration details, or the collaboration in some more detail. We've signed a memorandum of understanding to work together for 6 months with the option of a further 6-month extension to put the building blocks in place to create AdCella. That involves completing the establishment of the entity, and that needs to meet certain requirements in order to be able to attract the type of investment that we're looking at and the flexibility of investment that we're looking at. We have an established pipeline of potential assets, which we will review, expand together, and complete due diligence on. That will enable us to secure licensing agreements for those initial assets, and then to raise the capital for the first Western regulated clinical proof of concept studies for those assets in Australia. If we're successful at the end of that collaboration period, AdCella will be owned 75% by AdAlta and 25% by Synthesis BioVentures before we finance those initial clinical assets. It will include a license to ex-Asian rights for those near-to-clinic novel cellular immunotherapies emerging from Asia. And by Asia, we do include Australia and New Zealand in that mix. The financing will be in place to progress the initial asset or assets through first Western regulated clinical trials, and AdAlta and Synthesis BioVentures each have the right to invest the first $7.5 million in that first financing, and the right of first refusal to participate in subsequent financings, but equally we'll have the flexibility to bring external capital to the table as well. AdCella will have an option to license AdAlta's iBody platform and other cellular immunotherapy assets to help build its relationships and its pipeline, and AdAlta will provide the management services to AdCella under a jointly governed board. And to give you some flavor of what's coming, obviously we can't be specific about the individual assets, but the pipeline is real. We have confidentiality agreements in place covering over 10 possible assets. And you can see here that the majority of them have a high degree of differentiation. Many are already multifunctional, and most of them already have clinical data being gathered against them in an Asian marketplace. So there's a high quality set of differentiated assets for us to work on. We will be able, through this collaboration, to be able to accelerate the work we're doing on this in ways we couldn't have done before. So why should we be developing a cellular immunotherapy company? The market is large and is fast growing. We have a highly differentiated competitive position that we've established, and that's been enhanced by the collaboration with Synthesis BioVentures. We have a rich pipeline of differentiated product candidates, many with initial patient data to de-risk them that could be in the Western clinical trials in the very near term. This is a scalable business model. We can scale it as fast as capital and resources enable us by adding additional programs over time. And we have a strong team and partnership with Synthesis BioVentures that complements our existing known networks here in Australia. So just to recap, this is an important step forward in one of our 3 key partnering strategies. I wanted to reiterate that this is not replacing those other strategies. This collaboration with Synthesis BioVentures enables us to accelerate and move forward with our iBody platform and pipeline investments without having to wait for the realization of the partnering of our lead asset AD214. I do want to reiterate, though, that that partnering program is progressing satisfactorily. We're very pleased with the level of engagement we have on an ongoing basis there. So we continue to be all working on partnering opportunities across a range of opportunities, but we are super excited about the potential of AdAlta's role in cellular immunotherapies and our ability to execute that in partnership with Synthesis BioVentures. And so with that, I will stop sharing and open the floor to any questions, Russell, if we have any.
Thank you, Tim. Just before we dive into questions, just a quick reminder that you can ask questions in the Q&A slot below on your Zoom. The other thing is that I do strongly encourage everybody to check out our Investor Hub, where a recording of this presentation will be posted today, as well as within the next couple days, we will have the Q&As that were asked, and we'll provide answers to them. And a reminder that you don't have to wait for the webinars within our Investor Hub. You can actually ask us questions directly on any of the announcements we put out. And we're always looking forward to engaging with our investors on our website there. With that said, I'm going to open the floor to questions now. And our first question is looking at specifically at the immunocell therapies and activity in Asia, and is just asking if there could be some explanation around why Asia is so focused on immunocell therapies.
So maybe I'll take a first stab at that one, and then I know Andrew will have perspectives on this as well. I mean, there's a broader theme here that we've tended to think of Asian economies as being emerging as copiers of Western technology. China particularly, but also Korea, and to a certain extent Japan, have now leapfrogged that stage of their evolution, and they're leading in many technical fields now. China has had multiple 5-year plans where they've invested specifically in establishing a biotechnology industry. Their last 5-year plan, for example, committed to 6 US FDA-approved biologics plants by 2023, and I believe they achieved that. They're also investing heavily now to leapfrog Western science in a number of areas, and cellular immunotherapies is one of those areas. And they're benefiting from the experience they've had working in US institutions. Senior scientists from the US have moved back home, and also the work they've been doing with Western companies in this space. Many of the companies we're talking to as potential licensing partners for AdCella are experienced in companies like Kite, Gilead, Novartis, and many of the other leading cell and gene therapy players today. And of course, you know, the leading CAR T cell therapy for multiple myeloma is a collaboration between Janssen and Legend Biotechnology, which is a Chinese originated company. So this is a broader theme that says China specifically in Asia generally is rapidly advancing, and we cannot assume that their science is not world class. And in this field, it absolutely is. But Andrew, you got broader experience of that across a bunch of modalities and can add to that.
I'd just repeat a couple of the elements of your answer, Tim. Firstly, the 5-year plans are strategic, so they are not tactical. So whereas they would cover generics and those sorts of things as part of it, they're very much looking to the next generation of therapies and supporting and sort of feeding that next generation of therapeutics. So it's no surprise whatsoever that these CAR T therapies, which are, of course, such a growing modality for treatment of all sorts of different things, is front and center of their strategic plan. The second thing is, of course, the people. I mean, these sea turtles that come back, these really high quality scientists who cut their teeth in the US and other sort of high level, high tech environments. When they return, they bring those same strategic vision, but also massive competence in delivering delivering on the promise of those assets. And so those things together, and we've experienced this largely in small molecules, but also in cellular and biological therapies. That there is extraordinary skill and capability from those scientists. So terrific support from the government, high quality individuals and teams that can deliver on that. It's no surprise whatsoever that they are very much delivering on the promise of what those two things can bring, a pipeline of really interesting opportunities, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think, Andrew, that leads us directly to our next question, so that works perfectly. We did have a few questions requesting some clarification on the legal protections for IP within China, and specifically whether there's exclusivity arrangements with the Chinese government there. And I was just hoping you could very broad-based expand upon what you already started to answer.
Well, I mean, obviously, case by case, you need to do a full diligence on the strings that might be attaching to certain pieces of IP, and there has been a lot of sovereign cash going into the system to support those technologies. They do adhere to PCT, so in terms of patents and stuff, all of those patents are as protected in terms of global IP strategy as anywhere. And so licensing either the global rights or the Western rights is a very easy and very familiar process. We've done that a couple of times in other settings, and so there is no real problem. Often, that they'll request Chinese rights and stuff like that. That's a matter of negotiation as part of the commercial transaction that happens. And Tim might speak or may not speak, because I guess they're commercial in confidence at present around the sorts of how those negotiations. I have no problem whatsoever imagining that there will be a clean and entirely familiar commercial transaction of these assets out from China and into AdAlta. Maybe a few tweaks here and there around Chinese rights and so forth, but I'm guessing this is something very familiar to all of us as we've done this cross-border stuff in the past.
Yeah, and just to add to that, in general, we would anticipate, and we're certainly seeing, that most of our potential partners would like to retain Chinese commercialization rights. We're entirely fine with that. We're not, if we're not commercializing in China, which is an incredibly complex marketplace where you need that local expertise in any case, yeah, then we're only commercializing outside of China, where our focus is commercializing in Western regulated markets, where the IP protection regime is something that we're incredibly familiar with. The manufacturing process will be migrated out of China. These are products that need to be manufactured close to the patient. They're living drugs. The manufacturing site will need to be outside of China in any case. So from that perspective, the control of the supply chain will be sitting outside of China, with the possible exception of some of the raw materials and perhaps the viral vectors. And so that gives us a further degree of comfort that the patents that our partners will have established in Western markets will be not only rigorously reviewed, once they're granted, they will be enforceable. So in that sense, I think this is a business model that is not dependent upon taking Western IP into China and then trying to commercialize it there. It's about taking IP, incredible IP originating in China and other Asian markets, and taking it into Western markets where we fully understand the IP environment.
Fantastic. Thank you both for answering that question. There was slide 15 did answer this question slightly, but there was a question around the specific pieces of technology, and there was some hope that you could go maybe into a little more detail on one or two of those mentioned on slide 15.
So essentially what we're looking to license initially will be a cellular immunotherapy product that has already been developed to the point where it is ready to go into first in human clinical trials, or ideally, and in many cases, will already have patient clinical data. So we will be acquiring or licensing the know-how to manufacture that product and the data sets that support its development. We will translate that manufacturing process to an Australian manufacturing location initially. We will manufacture for Western regulated clinical trials, which initially will be conducted in Australia. And that will provide our partners and us with the opportunity to get the first Western regulated clinical data on this product. We are deliberately selecting those products based on accessing solid tumours. The competitive landscape in hematology is very, very high in this day and age. So we're looking for assets that are targeting solid tumours and non-cancer applications. We're looking for a degree of novelty in the targets that they're hitting. So again, we assess the competitiveness of the particular solid tumour target. We're looking for the quality of the preclinical and the clinical data, and I have to say I've been seriously impressed by some of the companies we've spoken to. And we're looking for partners whose pipeline is extensive, but who are still going to need and essentially have a capability to generate multiple products over time, but where the iBodies can provide a turbocharging of their platform by providing additional targeting moieties or additional immune modulation modules that can be built into a partner's platform. So I don't really want to go into too much more detail around who they might be yet. If I provide any more detail than is on slide 15, you might be able to start to work out who they are. And that's not consistent with our confidentiality agreements. But that flavour of the types of assets we're looking for, hopefully gives you a flavour that we are looking for highly differentiated assets that are addressing high unmet needs, not copycat products.
So absolutely. There was I know we've had a lot of highly technical terms used in this presentation, and we did have a few questions just asking to provide a little bit of definitions and differentiating some of the terms that were used, specifically around CAR T therapy and immunotherapy. If you could just maybe provide a little bit of definitions.
Sure. That's a really important question. And I'm conscious that the data sets are not, this is an emerging field, and so the data sets don't necessarily match up with how we segment the market. So let's talk about the broadest segment is called cellular immunotherapy. So these are living drugs that use a patient's own immune cells to treat disease. Your immune cells are made up of multiple different types. They can be T cells, which are responsible for what we call our adaptive immune system. These are highly specific to a particular target. If you think about this is how we fight viruses, for example, they're specific to a particular virus. You have natural killer cells, which are part of what's called our innate immune system. This is a broad brush sort of front line of defense, if you like, whereas your T cells are much more like your special forces going to attack disease. And then there are a range of other different subtypes. So the broader field of cellular immunotherapy could encompass all of those. And then we can modify those cells in different ways. In some cases, we simply take a very narrow subset. They might be, for example, immune cells that are found in tumors that have been able to penetrate into tumors. We expand those in a lab and give them back to a patient. That's called a tumor infiltrating lymphocyte. It's an established type of cellular immunotherapy. The one that's more familiar and that's led the charge in this space has been CAR T cell therapy, where we engineer the cells to express a novel receptor called a chimeric antigen receptor, or CAR, on the surface of the T cell that allows the T cell to go and find cancer. That's called CAR T. You can use the same strategy with a natural killer cell. That's called CAR NK cells. So what we've tried to do here is to say we're interested in innovation that solves the problems of solid tumors. We're interested in innovations that require modifications that potentially involve eye bodies. But at this point in time, the business model does not require us to be only CAR T, which is why we talk about cellular immunotherapy, as opposed to just CAR T, which is a subset of cellular immunotherapies.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think that definitely covers the question there. We have one last question, so just a reminder, if you have questions, please submit them now. And if you don't have the opportunity to submit a question now, but you think of a question later, please go on to our website and go to our Investor Hub and record the questions there, and we'll definitely be more than happy to answer them. So there was questions surrounding the indicative timeline for this pipeline. Is there any more visibility that you can provide investors there?
So the best visibility I can provide is that, one, we have an active pipeline of potential assets that we've been accumulating over the last 12 to 18 months. Two, that the initial phase of this collaboration with Synthesis BioVentures, it contemplates a 6-month period of time to establish the entity in the initial pipeline of assets, with the option of extending that for another 6 months. So yeah, that 6-month window is really the aspiration that we've established under the current version of the Memorandum of Understanding.
We do have one more question that just came through, and I might butcher some of the pronunciation here, so I apologize in advance. Will you develop autologous and allogenic cellular immunotherapies?
Okay, so a bit more technology to bring into the table here. Autologous cell therapies basically means a patient's own cells. This is a patient-specific drug, and it's where most cellular immunotherapies operate today. It requires you to take a patient's own immune cells, engineer them in the lab, give them back to the patient. And so you can only start the manufacturing process when the patient is diagnosed. Allogeneic cellular immunotherapies, or allogeneic therapies, involve a donor cell. So the cells can be taken from anyone. They can be manufactured and put on the shelf, more like a traditional pharmaceutical. At this stage, the majority of clinical stage cellular therapies are autologous. We do have 1 or 2 allogeneic products in our mix. I think there is at least 2 on the slate of potential candidates that we included in the presentation that are allogeneic. The advantage of allogeneic is potentially lower cost and faster turnaround for the patients. So we are not restrictive on that at the moment. I think the recognition at the moment is that the challenges of getting allogeneic cells up is still remains high, and so the fastest way to advance is likely to be autologous. The other piece of that is that in the future, the industry is likely to bypass allogeneic cellular therapies and move straight to generating them directly in the patient themselves, which will be a great step forward in terms of simplification.
Sorry, Mark, Andrew, did you want to?
No. And I thought I was the immunology professor, so that's. I think they're terrific responses. There is a complexity there around the two approaches. As Tim says, much of this will be sorted out if you can actually do this in the patient rather than in the tissue. So some of the challenges from allogeneic would be sorted out from that, but I think they were great answers.
So we all have a question, and this comes back to the timeline a little bit, but I do feel it's worth specifying here. In terms of returns or forms of revenue from partnerships, if you could potentially discuss both in terms of potential timelines, but also more specifically how that will emerge through.
Yeah. So the business model for AdAlta will be very similar to AdAlta's business model, where we will take assets, we will develop them through an inflection point that de-risks the asset for other companies before we would anticipate then on licensing them to larger pharmaceutical companies for commercialization. And this is the way this sector particularly is emerging. The larger pharmaceutical companies tend not to have their own in-house capability to develop these products, when they're absolutely sourcing them from smaller companies. They need them de-risked. They need, and the advantages and the value we would add is that first Western regulated clinical data that supports and puts them on a pathway to Western regulated approval, as well as having an established GMP compliant manufacturing base. You put those two things together, that's a significant value add from the assets we'll be licensing in. We would anticipate that typically you're looking at a 6 to 9 month window for a technology transfer, anywhere from 12 months to 24 months for your phase 1 clinical trial, depending on the indication and the rate of recruitment. And at that point, we would then have a transactable asset for further on licensing or value realization. And that would be a classic sort of on licensing, sub-licensing deal. So we're really looking at a potential 3-year window from acquiring an asset to being able to realize a return on it, which is way faster than our traditional business model of discovery all the way through to phase 1 and beyond, which we've used with 8214.
Fantastic. I believe we have ran out of time, unfortunately. I know we still have a few questions, but with that, I am going to close the webinar. Please remember that a copy of this webinar will be available on our website. And if you have any other questions on any other announcements, you can always go there and ask them directly on the announcements on our website. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Andrew. And thank you all the investors for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.